Months later, in a quiet village far from the city, an elderly man named Mr. Mike was tending his garden. As he trimmed his flowers, he spotted something lying by the bushes. Squinting, he took a closer look and gasped. "Good heavens!" he muttered, seeing a young woman, bruised and bloodied, barely breathing. "Sir, are you all right?" asked his cleaner, Mrs. Rose, running to his side. He pointed, unable to find words. Mrs. Rose knelt beside the woman and checked her pulse. "She's alive, sir," she exclaimed. "But barely. We need to get her to a hospital." Mr. Mike immediately called his doctor, who arrived swiftly, taking Princess to the hospital where she received proper care. Months passed as she lay in a coma, but finally, one day, she opened her eyes, weak but alive. Unable to remember who she was, she gratefully accepted Mr. Mike's kindness. As he nursed her back to health, she began to feel a deep affection for him, calling him father. More than a year later, Princess had grown stronger and felt like a part of Mr. Mike's family. One day, he sent her to the market for some supplies. While walking down a busy street, she noticed a couple with a little boy. The child's face tugged at her heart. She felt an intense, inexplicable connection to him. "Jason?" she whispered, her breath catching. The memories came flooding back. Suddenly, she was running toward the family, tears streaming down her face. "Jason! Jason! It's me, Mommy!" she cried, reaching for her son. The couple looked at her in alarm, clutching the boy protectively. "Who are you? Get away from us!" the woman shouted. "Please!" Princess sobbed, trying to reach Jason, who was staring at her with wide eyes. "You're my son. Don't you remember me?" As she lunged forward, the man shoved her, causing her to stumble backward. She tripped, falling into the path of an oncoming car. The driver, Darasimi, slammed on his brakes just in time, rushing out to catch her before she hit the ground. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. He recognizes Princess but wasn't sure. But Princess, dazed and desperate, clung to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, help me find my son." As Darasimi was driving Princess to the hospital, her phone rang. It was Mr. Mike calling, so he answered, explaining the incident that had just happened. "Bring her back to my house," Mr. Mike instructed after listening patiently. "She'll be safe here." When they arrived, Darasimi's face lit up with surprise. "Mr. Mike?" he said, recognizing his former boss, who had once treated him like family. "Darasimi," Mr. Mike replied warmly, extending his hand. "It's been a long time." After exchanging greetings, Darasimi helped carry Princess inside, gently setting her down before he took his leave. Once alone, Mr. Mike looked at Princess with a mixture of sympathy and understanding, his voice low and somber, as narrate his story of how he ran away from everyone to hide in this distant island alone. He confided in Princess, revealing how his wife and brother had betrayed him. All the children he had believed were his turned out to be his brothers. Together, his wife and brother plotted several times to kill him so they could seize his wealth. But a good Samaritan stepped in, warning him of their intentions and urging him to flee. Acting on this advice, he froze all his business accounts and assets, faked his death, and disappeared. He shared how, at first, he had considered returning, but once he realized that everyone around him had only cared about his wealth, he chose to remain in hiding, waiting for God to call him home. He found solace in his new life, living quietly with only his cleaner and gardener, who were unaware of his true identity. They, unlike the others, treated him with genuine love and respect. He also disclosed to Princess how even Darasimi had stolen from him, deepening his mistrust in those he once considered close. Princess glanced up, sensing the depth of his sadness. Princess reached out, touched by his pain. "I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that." "Neither did you," he replied softly. "And even that young man, Darasimi. He betrayed me once. It took me years to forgive him, but I did. I learned that holding on to the bitterness only poisoned me further." With a shaky breath, Princess began to share her own story, describing everything she'd endured, from her family's tragic death to the betrayals, abuse, and the painful separation from her children. As she spoke, tears flowed freely, each word lifting a burden from her heart. Mr. Mike listened attentively, nodding with understanding. When she finished, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you realize, Princess. But if there's one thing I've learned in my years of suffering, it's that only God can truly heal the kind of wounds we carry." Princess looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I used to pray, but now I feel as if God abandoned me." "He never abandoned you," Mr. Mike assured her, his tone gentle yet firm. "Sometimes, he allows us to go through fire so that we come out stronger. But I promise you, he's still with you." With patience and kindness, Mr. Mike began to share his faith with her. Over time, Princess opened her heart again, finding solace in daily prayers and reading the Bible. As weeks turned into months, she felt a gradual peace and strength return to her. Her once broken spirit started to heal, and her mind grew clearer. But life dealt her another blow when Mr. Mike's health declined, and he eventually passed away. Before he died, he entrusted everything he owned to Princess. Unknown to most, Mr. Mike had been a multi-billionaire. But the tragedy that happened to him had driven him into hiding. He'd built a modest hut on one of his large properties, content to live simply, far from the world that had betrayed him. In his final days, he took her hand. "Princess, remember this," he said weakly. "You are not cursed or abandoned. You are meant for great things. Use my legacy to stand tall, heal, and make the world a better place. Seek out therapy, for your mind and soul need healing, just as your body did." When he passed, Princess mourned deeply, questioning once again why everyone she loved seemed to leave her. Perhaps she is not meant to have anyone close to her heart, she concluded. She remembered the cruel words of her aunt and cousins, who had called her a witch, a curse to everyone around her. She thought perhaps they were right, but she knew she had to honor Mr. Mike's wishes. She sought therapy, slowly working to rebuild herself from the inside out. With each session, she felt her strength return, her vision sharpen. She knew now that her journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Determined to reclaim her children, Princess prepared to face the world. She would seek justice for everything she had endured and for every precious person she had lost. When Princess resumed her role at Mr. Mike's company, she was a force to be reckoned with. Strict and no-nonsense. She immediately sacked any staff members who dared to disrespect her. Over time, she became even wealthier, more intelligent, and well-respected. People feared and admired her in equal measure. One day, as she reviewed documents in her office, the door creaked open. It was Darasimi, the young man who had helped her at the market. "Ms. Emma," he greeted her, stepping inside. "I'd like to discuss my contract with you." "Who allowed you in?" Princess demanded, her voice icy. "Get out! And shut the door behind you." Darasimi stood his ground. "I have been coming consistently for over a month now. And you won't grant me an audience. I just need a moment of your time." Princess's irritation flared. She reached for her intercom and called security. "Escort him out," she ordered. The guards quickly moved to comply, escorting him out of the office. Darasimi waited outside the gate, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. He had something important to say, and he wasn't about to give up so easily. Later that evening, as Princess was driving out of the office parking lot, Darasimi stepped in front of her car, waving his arms to get her attention. She rolled down the window, annoyance creeping into her voice. "What do you want now?" "Please, Ms. Emma," he pleaded, his voice urgent. "I need your help. I really need this contract. I have worked hard for it." Princess scoffed. "That's not my problem. I have my own issues." Darasimi's desperation rose as he shouted back. "I could help you with your son, if you want. Please, we could help each other." Princess's heart skipped a beat. How did he know about Jason? She felt a wave of panic wash over her. No one knew about her past except Mr. Mike, she thought. "How do you know about my son?" she asked, a sharp edge to her voice. "I don't know much, but I see it in your eyes." "Just give me a chance," he implored, stepping closer to her window. Without a second thought, she quickly parked her car and opened the door. "Get in," she said abruptly. Darasimi hesitated, then climbed into the passenger seat, relief flooding his face. "Thank you." As they drove home, Princess kept her eyes on the road, her mind racing. Upon arriving at her house, Darasimi felt a chill run down his spine. The estate was surrounded by high walls topped with barbed wire, and security personnel were stationed at every corner. Guards in dark uniforms wielded heavy firearms, their expressions serious and alert. Darasimi's heart raced. "This is intense," he muttered, glancing nervously at the armed guards as he stepped out of the car. "It's necessary," Princess replied, her tone dismissive. "You never know who might be lurking." Inside the house, the atmosphere was just as imposing. Security cameras were positioned in every room, and more guards patrolled the hallways. Princess led him through the luxurious but intimidating space until they reached a more comfortable sitting area. Once they were settled, she turned to him. "How do you know me?" she finally asked, curiosity piqued. Darasimi took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I met you at the market when you were in trouble. I couldn't just stand by and watch. I recognized you, and I've been trying to get your attention ever since. Why didn't you say something earlier?" Princess demanded, still wary. "I didn't think you'd remember me." "You were in a vulnerable state," he replied, his tone earnest. Princess nodded slowly, processing his words. Despite her initial resistance, she could sense his genuine concern. After putting him through a lot of scrutiny, she finally agreed to grant him the contract he sought. Princess feared something bad may happen to Darasimi, so she kept her identity hidden from him. As Princess and Darasimi worked together, they began to grow closer despite the rocky start. Darasimi couldn't shake the feeling that he knew her as Princess. But since Mr. Mike had introduced her as his granddaughter, and changed her name to Emma. He found himself confused. Initially, Princess was strict and often intimidating. But Darasimi was persistent in trying to make her feel comfortable around him. He would share jokes or small stories during their meetings, hoping to chip away at her stern demeanor. Over time, Princess began to loosen up, her laughter echoing in the office as they navigated projects together. It was during these conversations that he opened up about his past. "You know, the girl I was dating when Princess left me to marry. A wealthy man made me steal from Mr. Mike," he confessed, a shadow of pain crossing his face. "It ruined everything." His vulnerability struck a chord with Princess, and she could see the weight he carried. Darasimi's journey had been incredibly tough. In his effort to pay Mr. Mike back, he had to sell almost all of his property, including his father's school, which he had treasured deeply. "I had to start life all over again," Darasimi admitted, his voice laced with regret. Princess stared at him, her tone cold. "So, you stole from my father? You were part of those who betrayed him?" Darasimi's face fell. "I was young and foolish. I've felt terrible about it ever since. It has not been easy until I met you." Princess looked at him with a spike of anger, clearly wanting to say more but staying silent. Darasimi noticed and gently urged her, "Please, say what's on your mind." But Princess remained quiet, as though she hadn't heard him. He softened his voice, calling her name. "Princess." She turned, a hint of defiance in her eyes. "Who's this princess you keep calling me?" Darasimi took a deep breath, his voice wistful. "She was a dear friend, someone I loved very much when I was younger. But she left to marry a rich man. I was heartbroken. When I tried to reach her, I found her family packing up to leave. Her aunt told me to forget her, to move on, she is married. My mother comforted me, but losing her was a wound that never fully healed. You look so much like her, except..." He reached toward her face, his fingers hesitating at the scar on her cheek. "Except for this." Princess's expression softened. After a moment, she asked, almost whispering, "Why didn't your family help her while she was suffering at her aunt's place? Why didn't you look for her?" Darasimi looked away, stumbling over his words. I was young, I didn't know. I should have. But," he added, searching her face, "how do you know her aunt mistreated her?" Princess stood up, overwhelmed, and walked away, her mind a storm of memories. Darasimi followed, gently taking her hand. Her eyes were red, filled with past hurt and longing. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Something in her broke, and Darasimi, now almost certain she was indeed his long-lost princess, pulled her into a warm embrace. She started to cry, letting out the years of pain and betrayal. He led her gently to his car and took her to his house, where she spent the night. Early the next morning, Darasimi brought her breakfast in bed, his presence calm and comforting. Slowly, Princess opened up, telling him everything, the years of suffering, her troubled marriage, her mistreatment, and finally, how she met Mr. Mike. Darasimi listened, his heart aching for her. "I'm so sorry for everything," he murmured, reaching for her hand. "I promise, I'll never leave you again." From that day on, Princess grew more comfortable around Darasimi. Their love began to blossom once more. A love that had been buried but never forgotten. Darasimi encouraged Princess to rebuild her faith and strength. helping her find peace through faith in Christ. Together, they sought justice. With Durasamy's support, Princess finally located Mrs. Udeh and Gloria. Both were arrested and questioned. It was discovered that Mrs. Gloria is a human trafficker who promised young ladies husband or good life abroad but sold them into prostitution, organ harvesters, or to baby factories. They led authorities to Jane and Bernard. Through the proper channels and with persistent prayers, Princess reclaimed her children. Empowered by her journey, Princess dedicated her life to helping others. She opened an organization to support and fight for those who are going through similar struggles she went through, sharing her story to bring hope and healing to others. Her books, full of her struggles and triumphs, became widely read, offering solace to those suffering from emotional and mental trauma. Eventually, Princess and Darasimi married, their bond strengthened by the trials they had overcome. Together, they supported each other's dreams, living a life of faith, love, and purpose.